Let's go to Qatar and say good morning and hello to Miguel Delaney. Miguel, how are you doing?
Good morning. Not too bad.
Any trends that you've noticed so far in terms of how the best teams are playing over the course of what's nearly the end of the group stages?
I'm not sure. I think it's probably been just too few games for trends. The one thing I would note, and I suppose this was kind of predicted before the tournament began, is that there's a bit of a split between very young and fresh top teams, who I suppose would be Spain, England to a degree, despite Southgate being there 6 years, but it is still quite a young squad. Brazil. And then these kind of teams that are arguably on the wrong side of a cycle, gone a bit stale. Belgium being the standout. It doesn't mean it's kind of definitive. Germany actually another example in all that, despite Flick coming in, because they almost seem a bit of a halfway house. So it's not definitive, given I would have put Croatia in that group, but they've almost took advantage of Canada's inexperience. But it'll probably be kind of until the last 16, the quarters, when a lot of these coaches have had two to 3 weeks to prepare. They will kind of see proper footballing trends, and also when you see kind of the real split in the competition between those there to kind of, I suppose, have a go, and then those who are really serious about actually winning it.
Yeah, and that level of seriousness about those teams, I suspect that there isn't that significant gap. There isn't one team who are absolutely miles ahead of everybody just yet. Like Brazil are good, but they're not absolutely sensational just yet. And that's why this World Cup is right there for probably 6 or 8 teams.
But I mean, I would have said the most open until 2006. Now, I know people can point to how Germany weren't the favourites going in 2014, and France, I think, were maybe, I'm not sure if they were full favourites going in 2018. But you could obviously see as the tournament went on, when you put it in its wider context, that these, like, they weren't just teams as in the kind of the first 11s and the squads coming to a peak. Spain, Germany, and France were all teams that were kind of the products of these longer term overhauls that have become basically dictated international football for the last 2 decades, where these wealthy Western European countries industrialised youth production, and England are the latest to do that after Spain, Germany, and France. So maybe that's ominous for anyone that's a bit reticent about the words "is coming home." But yeah, you're right. I think in this competition, there is no super favourite like that. There's no kind of team that's complete. I think from all the games I've been to and what I've seen, the team that reached the highest level in any one game, in fact it was 2 games really, was Spain. But even in that second game against Germany, when I thought that for 20 minutes they were excellent, you can still see they're flawed. And I think like the biggest flaw with Spain almost seems like their inexperience. It feels like it might just be a cycle too soon, which with that inexperience almost feeding into at times a real kind of almost naive overconfidence about what they're doing, because they're willing to take absolutely any ball on or try any ball, no matter the area of the pitch. And it did put them in danger a few times. But that said, I mean, despite that inexperience, maybe that's their flaw, as well as a few positions in their starting 11. But again, given how open this competition is, that might not matter, because I think it's something I must say that struck me after that Spain-Germany game, especially given that Germany have suddenly been given a chance again. In that, when we think of teams that can win a World Cup, we always have kind of these imagined ideas of perfection, but that's not always the case. And there's a lot of champions who've won it, who've been big nations, but haven't necessarily been absolutely complete teams in that way. Although the last of those was probably Italy 2006. We might have another this year.
You were in the England-Wales game last night, Miguel. What was the atmosphere like? Because I guess it's one of those games where you'd expect a little bit of an atmosphere. Chesney Hawks maybe helped at half-time, I'm sure.
Actually, I found it quite a strange occasion, I have to say. I mean, it was the first time I was in that stadium, which is one of the smaller stadiums. And to be honest, it was really weird. It didn't feel like I was at a World Cup match. And obviously, so much about this really controversial tournament is quite alien in terms of kind of the football staging, I would say. And also elements of Qatar, not least the fact that it's propped up by an underclass of people as it puts on this kind of veneer. The whole thing is surrounded by artificiality, I would say. But in this game, I mean, even like the first game where I felt like this has a World Cup atmosphere, was say Argentina, Saudi Arabia, because almost the time of day, actually. But also there were so many fans from both countries. Now, there are fans about Wales and England here, but I'm not sure what it was. I think it was something about the occasion. The fact that, yes, there was something on the line. It wasn't that much on the line because it would have taken a huge turnover for England not to qualify or finish top of the group and for Wales to get through. And it did just feel like almost kind of one of these friendlies between these two nations at some regional ground in England, with that obviously accentuated by Chesney Hawks inexplicably coming on at half time.
You strike me as a fan. Are you a fan of Chesney?
Well, I couldn't say I know any more than one song, which I'm sure is true for a lot of people.
Yeah, fair. I guess the performance from England last night, it's hard to really judge where they're at after the Welsh game. The Wales haven't been impressive at all, but is Southgate getting any closer to knowing his best 11, or does he need to even?
I don't think Southgate has to know his first 11 because and I think one of his strengths, and he does get a lot of criticism from a fair, but one of his strengths is kind of the way he uses that first 11 to kind of. It's a little bit like Graham Potter, if in a different way, in terms of it involves everyone, ensures no one is really fixed in the team, bar the centre halves. But I suppose that's actually another issue because of England's paucity in that area. And I think the biggest question for England is really kind of really nailing their identity, which it still doesn't feel they completely have. And like Southgate touched on this, he touched on it after the USA game where he talked about like they're still they can be two different teams. In one game they got the defence right, and USA did really press them, to be fair. And in the other game they got the attack right. And there hasn't been a match yet where it's both come together at the same time to, I suppose, complete England the way we're talking about. And I mean, you can't judge too much from Wales because Wales, like they reminded me of Ireland, say in Europe, where it was clearly by that point a tournament too far. Maybe that player has missed a World Cup at their peak, as we did in 2010. And they were they made it difficult for England in the first half. And actually, I would have questioned Southgate's midfield in the first half, but once England went ahead with a free kick, Wales had to come out, and that was kind of that. So it was a bit of a difficult game to judge. And their last 16 game on Sundays was a completely different challenge because Senegal are one team that England have never played before.
It's possible that he goes back to 3 centre-backs at some stage in the tournament. Is it possible he does it against Senegal, or will he continue with the team that he's used in this tournament so far? Because we were having this conversation earlier. We've talked with Jonathan Wilson a good bit over the last 18 months or so, and he makes the point in the big games where Southgate believes that they're going to have less of the ball, he plays 3 at the back, and that hasn't gone away just because this tournament has started the way it has.
Yeah, and they had a forgiving group. For me, it'd be a huge surprise given everything we know about Southgate if he didn't go for 3 at the back against the bigger nations. Because I mean, it almost creates this sort of contradiction about England in this sense. And obviously, like, they're absolutely stacked in the forward position. So many brilliant attackers. I mean, I was actually just watching some Spanish television last night just about to see what they were saying, and we're going on about in awe of the depth that England have in the forward line. But the kind of contradiction to that is they are quite thin in the centre, particularly in centre half, and the midfield has been a bit of an issue, and they can't quite find the right mix. So to counter that, Southgate basically tends to fill those areas to make England difficult to break down at the cost of 1 or even 2 of those attackers. So it means we have fewer of his best attacking players on the pitch, and I suppose that's made Mason Mount a bit of a lightning rod because he's a really good player, tactically very good, important for how England press and how he links the midfield to attack. But he's not you wouldn't consider him one of England's better players to watch in that regard. One of the flair players, kind of the lightning attackers, and he kind of putting a player like that in almost makes Southgate seem more rigid than he is. But yeah, it's almost because they've got so many good attackers, Southgate feels the need to actually be more protective. Now, again, there are bigger debates there over whether a coach like Luis Enrique, say, would actually just completely front load the team because he'd play a different approach. But this is Southgate's way, and a lot of debate about Southgate as well. I mean, it's something that's overlooked in international football, particularly as regards kind of debates over people like Roberto Martinez, and it could yet be influential in this World Cup, but very few top coaches want to manage in the international game. Luis Enrique and Hansi Flick stand out because they've had a recent club success, and they're kind of only in international football because of circumstances in their career, a little bit like Antonio Conte in 2016. But like Luis Enrique, especially, I mean, if he left Spain now, he'd probably walk into an absolutely top job. And that's something else that could kind of dictate things over the course of the tournament. And it's where there has been questions about Southgate when it comes down to those kind of exacting games against the very best teams, or the very best coaches, you might say. he's always kind of out-thought in some way.
It's amazing, Miguel, like Marcus Rashford, we've been talking about him a lot this morning, and like what a performance last night, and the fact that he's now on 3 goals, joint top scorer for the tournament. And look, you pointed this out in your match report last night for the Independent. Like the scary thing is, regardless of his performance last night and the fact that he's joint top scorer, the debate will still rage now as to whether he actually starts the Senegal match.
Yeah, completely. And especially given after and I suppose this sums up one of the kind of issues for Southgate and also England's strength and depth, that after the Iran game, all the talk was, well, we can't leave Saka out. That ran through the camp. So, and then of course you got the Foden issue, given that was the one that dominated this game. I mean, when it comes to that, it does get to those situations where you almost think, well, why doesn't Southgate play 3 of those forwards behind Harry Kane? Or even, well, I mean, a lot of people might say drop Kane given he hasn't scored yet. That's just not going to happen, though. And Kane, I mean, given he's one of the few number 9s in this tournament, he's worth banking on. But then, of course, you get to the issue, if Southgate plays 3 of the forwards to accommodate a Rashford and a Saka or whichever, then suddenly you've either got to go 3 at the back or the midfield is thin. Either central defensive area or the midfield is going to be thin. So it is the case that Southgate has that issue of almost kind of there's always one space to fill, no matter what way he configures his team, and that's England's great flaw, really.
Yeah, in most countries it would seem like it's a wealth of riches, but it's the point you make about the quality of the manager not having won over the public to the point where they're like, well, he's obviously the best man for the job because he knows everything about football, and until he wins a World Cup or a major tournament, they're not going to give him that. And like, I suppose
there is another side to that as well. I mean, like, tactics are only a certain part of it, and like, I suppose I interviewed Patrice Evra before the tournament began, and he was talking about kind of the French squad, obviously, like Deschamps' great quality, and Deschamps actually, especially before he won the World Cup in 2018, he received a lot of criticism in France and beyond for being a very rigid manager in the same way that Southgate was. But what Evra said, what you actually really have to realise about Deschamps is when it comes to a tournament, he's absolutely brilliant at rallying that kind of spirit that a team needs, because that even in football in 2022, where it's absolutely dominated by pressing and counter-pressing, and there's so many technical and tactical aspects and so much sports science, a tournament is such a specific thing because of the way it's such a kind of a concentrated period of time. And psychology, as we can see with Argentina almost more than anyone, psychology of it matters more than anything, because teams can suddenly get on that run, something can click. Deschamps is evidently excellent at that, but it's also one thing Southgate is good at, and he's good at kind of capturing the tone around a team and setting the right mentality. He's really good with the players, a very good man manager in that way. And I think it's something that's often overlooked amid all the tactical scrutiny on Southgate.
Well, if you consider how England have crashed out in previous tournaments where there hasn't been a Southgate figure who's been able to manage that properly, like basically all the way back to 1990, they've had some misfortune because the manager has not had the emotional intelligence to deal with the players, or the players have not had the emotional intelligence to deal with the tournament, and they haven't had somebody to be able to help coax them through. And just one last thing before we let you go, the Spanish cycle being too early for the Wunderkinds, if it wasn't to be, if they were to make it, like when you were talking about the Germany game, that game finishes 1-1. If that's a knockout game, and if that's a knockout game, it could finish 4-1 to either side, and you wouldn't be terribly surprised. Like, and you can literally write that in your head, like, oh, I see exactly how in extra time the kids decided, yeah, we're going to take this by the scruff of the neck, or one of the kids makes a horrible error and the team collapses. All of these outcomes are possible. But if they were to win, it's like the birth of something brand new. Like, I'm trying to manifest here.
The one thing, actually, watching Spain, obviously being half Spanish as well, so being invested in that side, it's impossible not to compare them to 2010 Spanish, or really the 2008, 2012 Spanish team that won 3 in a row. And they're better than Spain were in 2006. And 2006 was kind of like a learning campaign. This could be similar, but I do think Spain will go further. But there's an interesting thing there as well. I mean, as I was watching that Spanish game against Germany, it was, I was thinking about what the 2010 team would do, especially because the 2010 team, I think, were in the kind of public discourse considered more boring. Now, I would always put that down to the fact that because of the way Spain played, everyone sat deep against them, and it meant that Spain just had to pass and try and be patient. Whereas anytime anyone stepped out, Spain would destroy them, as it did to Italy in 2012. But this team does attack in a different way. I mean, they take more long shots, they surge down the flank. They're much more direct when they're trying to attack, and that's been such a focus of Luis Enrique. But that's at the cost. It can make them a little bit more susceptible. But it did strike me then. Like I do. This is where the inexperience came in. I think when Spain went 1-0 up against Germany in that match, I thought they took the feet off the pedals a bit, and kind of got. It was as if they felt the group was won. Whereas I think the 2010 team, who were kind of obviously really at a peak in terms of age and where they were in their career, as they did to Germany in that 2010 semi-final when they went 1-0 ahead, they would have just absolutely killed them with possession and totally controlled the game. That's something this team didn't do. And it does feel like with this Spain, they'll give you a chance. But again, it feels like this is going to be the World Cup of chances. And certainly, yeah, with the way... And like there's something bigger there as well, because obviously, like I wrote this in my preview, especially... Sergio Ramos kind of represented this, but I mean, he's quite old at this point anyway. But one of the reasons Luis Enrique got rid of players like Sergio Ramos, it's not just to be the star himself. It's for two reasons. I mean, this comes down to ego, but it does come down to control as well. Young players are much more malleable. They don't have the career, the experience to start questioning the manager on things or compare it to previous managers. But secondly, young players have much more vigor and intensity, so they can run in a way that you wouldn't get, and that's become a bit of a kind of a theme in club football as well. And so, yeah, Luis Enrique is doing something different in that regard.
Yeah, I'm on Team Enrique for the rest of the tournament. I've decided that's it. They're my team. Miguel, good stuff. Thanks a million. Great to talk to you.
Lads. Thank
Cheers.
You.